everyone. This is Brad Smith, author of Arizona Springtime, my memoir of a wonderful journey of the natural world in spring. I have photographed nature for over 45 years and will share some of the photos as we go along. Please subscribe to my Seldom Seen SW, which stands for Southwest, channel. It is free and will allow you to know when I have posted another chapter of the book. I am sharing my book in this format, so please sit back and enjoy. The journey begins in my birthplace of Illinois and then quickly moves to Arizona. So let's start. Arizona Springtime, Memoir of a Journey. It is copyright 2021, all rights reserved. It's dedicated to my wife, Audrey. I'm going to begin with a quote from Edward O. Wilson. Quote, "The experience of nature, to those who have learned to absorb it, is a magic well. The more you draw, the more there is to draw." End quote. Part 1, Transformation in an Illinois Forest. Chapter 1, Awakening to the Territory Ahead. Nature offers horizonless possibilities to anyone who wishes to access it, a spectrum that is varied from the smallest known particles, muons, to the structure of the universe. Nature is so overwhelming, we have had to invent a myriad of disciplines just to enter its dimensions. Within those disciplines, we invented further specializations to access nature's depth of mysteries. We invented biologists, microbiologists, physicists, planetary scientists, botanists, and range scientists. Then there are the access points for non-scientists, explorers, hikers, birders, and snorkelers, just to name a few. For myself, I access through a mixture of science teacher, exploration, spirituality, and philosophy. My earliest memory of nature related to an event during spring when I was only 16 months old. It was an event that is reminiscent of the unrelenting vengeance toward humans by the early incarnation of the ancient Mesopotamian god Enlil, who was rarely pleased by humankind's deeds. During a violent storm, I was being carried into the cellar of my great-grandmother's home in a small Midwestern village that was surrounded by family farms. I remember my grandmother carrying me close to her. She instinctively turned away from the glass windows of the storm door as we turned to go down the stairs. The memory is brief, and I only remember being safe, or rather, someone was keeping me safe. From later recollections offered by my grandmother and my mother, the violence done to my great-grandmother's house was minor compared to other homes in the town. The damage to the small one-story stick-built house was unusual. The large downpour of hail stripped the siding off the house. There was a tornado that touched down nearby, and the large hail and violent winds damaged nearby homes to an extent that the neighborhood was destroyed. Even my young senses knew something big was happening. It was big, all right. It was nature. Whether blame could go to an old, bearded man sitting on a golden throne, or a mother goddess, the storm indicated there was something out there that was huge, complex, and mysterious. The social and cultural changes from historical agriculture and small towns to crowded urban and suburban areas were still developing in the far south suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. The town I grew up in was originally named Hickory Bend, a quixotic pioneer town name that was later modernized to Glenwood, a proper suburban affectation. As a senior in high school, I still lived with my mother, father, and younger brother. We lived in a split-level stick and brick house constructed in 1964. From my earliest school-age years and into the early teen years, the street that I lived on had well-maintained, manicured lawns. In the new development, maple tree saplings were few at first, but as houses were completed and new neighbors joined us, the saplings were planted by the suburbanites along driveways and the street. During my formative years, I wanted a life to include adventure, like my favorite book character, the young Tom Sawyer, the protagonist of Mark Twain's famous children's book. As a child and later as a young man, I discovered the creativity of exploration. In the late winter or early spring of my 8th grade year at the stately James Hart Junior High School, I took it upon myself to emulate Tom Sawyer. Prior to lunch period, my class was a study hall. We were to work on homework that had been assigned earlier in the morning. There were about 30 students in the crowded room. The teacher conveniently would visit her boyfriend, a fellow teacher. She left the room to stand in the hallway talking to him. Instead of studying, I decided that I would go to the forest. It was barely visible out the wall of windows on the west side of the room. There was a metal composite lever on all windows that were easily swung up and open. My complicit friend Jeff accompanied me on my outings. Like the mafia omerta, we counted on the other students to remain vigilant in their studies and stay silent. Jeff and I would slip out the window and cross a grassy football field to the nearby Lions Club outdoor swimming pool. Our earliest outings from the school only took us that far before we became goosey from our nervousness and returned to class. Encouraged by a few successes, we set our sights on the more distant forest. For later excursions, we would run a couple of 100 yards past the fenced empty pool to a stately, ornate Victorian house. Stories from other kids corroborated the folklore that it was haunted. Ghostly sightings and strange lights were seen by kids or kids who knew other kids. The house was an unpainted two-story that appeared to be otherwise unoccupied. We ran past the house and then calmly slowed to a walk. The house was covered in weathered gray wooden siding, and tall stalks of dead weeds covered a gravel driveway that led to a busy 4-lane road. Across the street was the Isaac Walton Forest Preserve. It was owned and run by volunteers of the town of Homewood, Illinois. Within the confines of the Forest Preserve were 2 Little League fields. One time we visited those, but the ball fields were not my destination. The destination was a small pond hidden deep in the forest. Even during early spring, the pond was covered by thick ice. On our last journey, we could see some liquid water pooling at the edges. Popular belief held that there had to be at least 2 inches of ice in order for a person to safely walk out on it. And any ice fisherman could repeat that handy information, and I had been ice fishing just that winter. I boldly went out onto the pond, and as I got further out to the center, a disturbing cracking sound came from below. Visions of drowned kids from news reports of the unfortunates who foolishly walked out onto thin ice in neighboring Midwestern states flashed uncomfortably in my mind. "Don't come out here," I pleaded. "I'm not." "What are you going to do?" asked Jeff. He was close to the comfort of shore, and with cautious spirit returned there. I slowly slipped and slid with my eyes and ears alert. I was taking too long for Jeff. He had little patience. "I'm going back," he concluded. He left me and I continued until near shore when the ice gave way. My foot dipped into the water, but with my next step I gained the land. I ran with one soaked and cold foot back to the school. When I arrived back to the school, the window was closed and locked. Another class was seated at the desks, and the teacher was in the room. I boldly entered the school by a side door and then to the classroom. I explained to her that I'd forgotten my books. The teacher was skeptical, but I grabbed my books and left. The next time the teacher left the classroom, I went to open the window, but she returned. My Tom Sawyer adventures were stifled. Yet I learned the wilderness of the forest in springtime added to a sense of adventurous exploration that was well worth the effort. During those sojourns, I had limited participation with nature because I did not have a wide enough perspective and lacked objective observation. Still, I felt an immediate emotive connection. I always felt at home in a natural setting. I wanted to be a participant in nature, and the more I experienced that, the more fascinating it became. My innate curiosity blended well with the vast horizons of the natural world. My first realization that a spiritual quest could be combined with exploration happened in an innocuous way during the early spring of 1977. Ennui would be the word that described how I felt as a senior in high school. Originally a French word, its origins in Latin and later integrated into English, that expressed an overall boredom. Through nature, though, my vision of life changed over time, and I see there is no such thing as ennui. In my world that spring, I was a senior in high school with only 3 months until graduation. Homewood Flossmoor High School had a student population close to 4,000, with my graduating class of seniors, courtesy of the baby boom, just shy of 1,000. During one Saturday morning drive with my dad to buy mantles for the gaslight that emerged in the front lawn of the house, I stared blankly out the tempered glass windows. Then I spotted a thick stand of trees. That drew my interest. Close to the road in the foreground there was a large ramada and an empty parking lot. I asked my dad, "What kind of place is that?" "It's a forest." "Can I go in there?" "Yes." "But why would you want to go in there?" I told him that I needed to complete my final assignment for an independent photography class. The truth was, I was looking for something more spiritual, and I had found it. At the onset of spring, I was already prepared to go to the forest. Early spring weather in Chicago can run the gamut, from overcast, biting cold to sunny and pleasantly warm. In the Chicago area that bitter winter, a record amount of 85 inches of snow fell. The lowest temperature over those months was minus 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Generally, it was a stormy spring with volatile temperature fluctuations. One morning in late March, it began with a very warm low of 55 degrees and a brilliant crisp blue sky in contrast with the warm yellow disk of the sun. I wore a comfortable lined winter coat. The hip-length jacket was red with white leather and embroidered with Homewood Flossmoor High School across the back. I had a convenient red beanie to cover my head and ears. If the temperature warmed, I could stuff the beanie in the large pockets of the jacket. I borrowed my dad's favorite camera, a late edition 1967 Kodak Retina Reflex with a standard 50mm lens and a screw-on Xenar 135mm lens. I stuffed several canisters of Kodachrome 64, a low-speed transparent slide film, into one of the pockets. To reduce shaking from the ride on my bike, I put the leather strap attached to the camera holder across my neck and crossbody. A deeper, more satisfactory exploration of nature was about to begin. Around the town, my preferred mode of travel was on a bright yellow Schwinn World Traveler 10-speed bicycle. It was a bike particularly favored by long-distance bicycle travelers. I enjoyed the meditative sound from the 10-speed bike tires rolling over concrete and asphalt and the somnolence of the suburban streets. There was a deeper humming sound in contrast to the Schwinn Stingray I rode when I was younger. The photographs I would take in the forest preserve were for a slideshow to complete the independent photography class assignment. Real outdoor nature was about to become my main subject in photography and life. On the way to Glenwood Woods North, the forest preserve, I crossed Halsted Street, a major north-south thoroughfare. Once across the 4-lane street, I passed a Burger King. Beyond that was a bowling alley and ice skating rink. Across from the Burger King was an older development, a neighborhood of neat single-level homes. I rode the bike easily around the corner and sped along to 187th Street. The street was busy enough so that I turned the corner and rode over the bumpy sidewalk. Over my right shoulder across 187th Street was the Glenwood School for Boys. It was an old series of dark brick buildings made to look imposing. It was a reform school that housed boys who were incorrigible, the Huck Finns to the common Tom Sawyers. Barely seen through a screen of tall evergreens was the multi-level building that housed the undisciplined, or so I had been told. The street curved near the older part of town, at the tree-darkened street that included the Lions Club building. The road continued until there was a quick turn onto Glenwood Chicago Heights Road, then into the entrance of the Forest Preserve. After locking the bike to a light pole, I turned to face two large concrete ramadas. They were serious structures built for sturdiness and longevity. I walked up the concrete sidewalks that led to one of the ramadas. Inside of the concrete ramadas were two massive opposing fireplaces, but the warm sunshine offered outside offered no respite in the chilly ramada. I looked out the far side of the ramada to a small grassy area and further to a wall of low scrubby bushes and tall trees acting as sentinels. Two trails led into the forest. I prepared myself mentally to enter a new world. I was excited and eager. In the final sentence of Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Huck had just completed his adventure and was about to be sent back home. Quote, "I reckon I got to light out for the territory ahead of the rest, because Aunt Sally, she's going to adopt me and civilize me, and I can't stand it. I've been there before." End of quote. Entering the forest was my territory ahead, and I did not know what to expect, but I was looking forward to it and wanted to trust the experience as my new teacher. End of chapter 1.